So now we'll proceed to our next session, which is SwasthyaCON oration. And for that, we have our chairperson as Dr. Sushil Patel sir from Vadodara and Dr. Yash Patel sir from Ahmedabad. So I request them to introduce the orator.
Thank you, Dr. Kavya. And it is my indeed pleasure to chair this esteemed session that is a SwasthyaCON Gold Medal Oration. Swasthya is pleased to initiate the Swasthya Gold Medal to recognize the achievements of those who have already contributed to the society through their professional inputs, but also are on the path to do more in the years to come. It is thus not only the appreciation of the past, but also a precursor for the future. It is conceived as an annual award to continuously inspire talent and the performance dedicated to the community welfare. We are honored to invite Dr. Paresh Dandona to deliver the Swasthya Gold Medal oration. And to introduce Dr. Paresh Dandona, I invite my co-chair, Dr. Yash Patel.
Respected faculties, Dr. Paresh Dandona sir, Dr. V. Shishya sir, dear delegates, and Dr. Mangviro and the all international delegates as well as faculties. It is my indeed pleasure to introduce my professor who always built up the vision that he always demanded. Trace yourself for not your present job, but your future job. And he always mentored all of us, the generations and generations, to build on the diabetes care, diabetes management practice all over the world. Dr. Paresh Dandona is a fellow of American College of Endocrine, who had received fellowship from American College of Cardiology as well as American College of Physician. He is a director of diabetes endocrine metabolic disease of a diabetes metabolic and endocrine center of Sunnyvale as well as Western New York. It is indeed pleasure to invite you, sir, to talk on hypogonadotropic hypogonadism in diabetes, and effect of testosterone therapy. Thank you, Dr. Paresh Dandona, sir, to accepting this oration, and this stage is for you.
Hello, I'm going to be talking about hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, largely confined to type 2 diabetes and obesity, a condition that we described in 2004. And I'm going to be talking about the effects of testosterone treatment in this condition. Before I go ahead, I need also to mention that hypogonadotropic hypogonadism in diabetes and obesity is probably the commonest cause of male hypogonadal state. So, our original observation was described in 2004 in Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism. As you can see in the panel on the left, both total and free testosterone concentrations in diabetics, type 2 diabetics, was significantly lower. And also we found that the prevalence of this hypogonadal state was present in 1/3 of the type 2 diabetic patients. In addition, as you'll notice in the right panel, the LH and FSH concentrations were not elevated, they were actually somewhat low. And therefore, it is a state of hypogonadotropic hypogonadism and it's not primary hypogonadal state. The next thing that we noticed in this syndrome was the fact that the low testosterone were neither related to the duration of diabetes nor to HbA1c levels. The major correlation was with BMI. And the higher the BMI, higher the body weight, the lower the free and or the total testosterone. So clearly there was an indication that the hypogonadal state was related to obesity. And this then led us to two further studies, one to determine whether this state existed in type 1 diabetes. And as you can see in this slide, the type 1 diabetes is not associated with low free testosterone, whereas type 2 diabetes is even in the younger patients. And next, you see here a large study, community-based study, done in about 2,500 patients, where we determined that while type 2 diabetes on the right was a cause of hypogonadal state, the major contribution was from non-diabetic obese. So this has got to be kept in mind. Next, we looked at youngsters, because all of our previous studies were in middle-aged patients, and we just wanted to make sure that the young post-pubertal males, if they were obese, whether they had low testosterone levels, and indeed they did, as you can see in this slide, that total and free testosterone concentrations were significantly lower in the obese post-pubertal males. And of course, this is just to demonstrate in this cartoon that obesity superimposed upon normality through bad lifestyles and overeating not only leads to obesity, as you can see obviously here. You can see that the famous David with an immaculate male form also loses his musculature and also has shrunken genitalia. And what is important about this cartoon is that this cartoon was published on the internet a year before we described our syndrome. So this artist clearly knew what happens with obesity. Now, the next issue is the mechanism underlying this. And one of the initial propositions was that increased estradiol produced by increased aromatase activity in the adipose tissue in the abdomen may be the cause of suppression of the hypothalamo-hypophyseal gonadal axis. However, when we measured the free estradiol in these patients, they were significantly lower, consistent with low testosterone. So clearly, this was the cause. So what is the cause? And the major cause, it turns out, when we believe, is to be seen in this animal experiment on neuronal insulin receptor knockout mice carried out by Ron Kahn's group at Joslin Clinic in Boston, where they demonstrated that by knocking out the insulin receptor, not only did they induce a metabolic syndrome in these mice, that in addition, they got hypogonadotropic hypogonadism. So we believe that, in fact, this state is due to insulin resistance in the brain that occurs in these patients with obesity and type 2 diabetes, and this then interferes with GnRH release and therefore LH and FSH release and testosterone release eventually. Next, we looked at the possibility that these patients may have extra inflammation. As you can see, CRP concentrations were nearly double those in the eugonadal type 2 diabetics, which are high to begin with, because the normal CRP is about 1 or less, whereas here in the type 2 diabetics it was 3.25, and in the hypogonadal type 2 diabetics it was 6.39. So clearly excess of inflammation, and with excess of inflammation, as you know, you get interference with insulin signaling. Now, next we get on to a fairly important study that we published in 2016 in Diabetes Care. And what it shows is that if you obtain fat biopsies from these hypogonadal diabetic males, you actually see diminished expression of insulin receptor beta subunits, insulin receptor substrate 1, AKT2, and GLUT4, the glucose transporter 4, which responds to insulin in terms of glucose transport into the adipocyte. And at all these 4 sites, there's a significant diminution, and this is the molecular mechanism underlying insulin resistance in such extra insulin resistance in patients. And then we also looked at the expression of AMP kinase, which is another mediator of glucose transport, but it's not dependent upon insulin signaling. It's distinct from insulin signaling, and it normally, as we know, responds to exercise and to metformin. And you can see that AMP kinase is also significantly diminished in these obese hypogonadal patients. Next, let's look at the effects of testosterone administration in these patients. And as you can see, this study was carried out over the period of 24 weeks. And as you can also see that in the placebo group, there was a flat testosterone with no change, whereas in the treated group, who were given 200 milligrams of testosterone intramuscularly over this period, every 2 weeks, you can see a steady increase in testosterone concentrations. With this testosterone concentration increase, you have, as you can see on the right, the weight did not change significantly, A1C did not change significantly, HDL did not change significantly, LDL did not, triglycerides fell, PSA did not increase significantly. However, lean body mass significantly increased by nearly 3 kilograms. Fat mass diminished by about 2.5 kilograms. Visceral fat also decreased. Hepatic fat also a tendency to decrease. And with it, I need to now show you very important data on insulin resistance. And as you can see, prior to treatment on the left, the glucose infusion rate was significantly lower in the hypogonadal patients. And so there was an extra insulin resistance of the order of around 35%. And once we treated them with insulin, with the weight loss that you saw in adiposity and the gain in muscle, you can see an increase in sensitivity in the histogram part on the left, where the testosterone was given. So clearly, the extra insulin resistance over a period of 6 months of treatment, testosterone. And with it, there was a fall in free fatty acids, and as you know, free fatty acids interfere with insulin signaling. And then leptin concentrations fell as adiposity. And then, in addition, this is remarkable, that at all 4 sites at which I described the mechanism of insulin resistance, at all those 4 molecular sites, the insulin receptor beta subunit expression, IRS1 suppression expression, AKT2 expression, and GLUT4 expression, all of them increased with testosterone treatment, whereas in the placebo arm there was no change. With it, there was also an increase in AMP kinase. So the defect that I mentioned to you earlier on in AMP kinase was also reversed, and this increase occurred in the adipose tissue and in the muscle. And the phosphorylated form, the activated form of AMP kinase, you can see also increased. Now, with it, there were certain other changes which are of relevance to insulin resistance. SOX3, which interferes with insulin signaling at the RS1 level, was diminished. IKK beta was also diminished because it interferes with insulin signaling, and P10 is another molecule that interferes with insulin signaling and was suppressed. So clearly, benefits all round, metabolically speaking, in terms of insulin signal transduction and glucose uptake. And then on the right, what you're seeing is a fall in C-reactive protein, so there was an anti-inflammatory effect. With it, there was a concomitant fall in TNF-alpha, another anti-inflammatory effect, and of course, that then completes the package in terms of insulin sensitization and in terms of the anti-inflammatory effects. Now you get on to another very interesting proposition here, which is in the basal state of hypogonadal state, what you have is not only a diminution in testosterone, you have a diminution in the expression of androgen receptor, and with it, a reduction in estrogen receptor, and also a reduction in the aromatase expression. And that would explain also why estradiol concentrations in these patients are lower. And then on the right, you see the effect of testosterone administration, and androgen receptor, estrogen receptor, and aromatase expression all increase and normalize. So we can conclude that not only is there a deficiency in testosterone in this syndrome, there is a deficiency in the receptor to testosterone, so you've got a double whammy. And here we're looking at the mononuclear cell expression of androgen receptor, and again, it is diminished, and following treatment with testosterone, it increases. Then we are on to the question of androgen receptors in the muscle, and they too are diminished, and they increase following treatment with testosterone, both at the mRNA and the protein. Now we are on to muscle growth. We've all known for a long time that bodybuilders use testosterone to make their muscles grow, and we were intrigued by the fact that we had these hypogonadal patients and to see what would happen to their muscle. And as you noticed earlier on, the muscle mass increased. So now these are the molecular mechanisms elucidated for the first time in our group, and you can see that the plasma concentrations of IGF-1, which is responsible for muscle growth, increase significantly over this period of 23, 24 weeks. And in addition, another novel factor shown for the first time, FGF2, fibroblast growth factor number 2, which also modulates muscle growth and has been shown to be so in mice. In the human, this is the first study to demonstrate an increase in FGF2. And then beyond that, you can see that there is the expression of FGF2 in the muscle also increases following testosterone treatment, and also that of the receptor to FGF2 in the muscle. So FGF2R2 is also increased, and at the same time you have a suppression of myostatin, which inhibits muscle growth, and also of MRF4, which inhibits muscle growth. So there's a combination of effects at the skeletal muscle level which promotes, on the one hand, muscle growth and inhibits the inhibitors of muscle growth. What we have here is an increase in ferroportin expression, which is the transporter of iron from the gut and a liberator of iron from stored sites in the body, where they are sort of stored. Iron is stored in the phagocytic cells that take up the destroyed erythrocyte, and then iron is stored out there, and ferroportin allows it to be released. And in addition to the ferroportin increase, there was an increase in transferrin, and there was an increase in transferrin receptor, which would allow iron to arrive at the erythropoietic site. Next, what I want to show you is a set of dramatic changes with long-term testosterone administration. And in this particular study, carried out with my colleague Farid Saad and Haider, father and son, in Bremerhaven in Germany, you can see here now the effects of testosterone therapy over a period of 11 years. And you can see that in the placebo arm, where the patients did not get any treatment, you have no change. So whereas in the other arm, you've got an increase in testosterone steadily over this period. And with it, you can see a fall in weight in the testosterone arm, whereas there is an steady increase in weight in the untreated patient. Here you have an increase. You can see an increase in insulin sensitivity as reflected in HOMA-IR, and as you know, HOMA-IR is inversely related to sensitivity. So HOMA-IR steadily falls in the testosterone arm, and HOMA-IR steadily rising in the untreated patient. And then we get on to A1C to see the quality of control of diabetes in these patients, and you can see steady reduction in A1C in the testosterone arm, whereas there is a rise in A1C steadily in the untreated. And with it then, at a mean level of around 8 years of treatment in this entire group, the maximum amount of duration of treatment was 11 years, as I showed you. You can see that more than 91% of patients had an A1C less than 7%. 83% had an A1C less than 6.5%. 46% had A1Cs below 5.7, so that they were the non-diabetic range, but they still needed diabetic treatment. But the remarkable part is that in 34%, 1/3 of the patients, there was a total remission in type 2 diabetes. A1Cs were below 5.7 without any anti-diabetic treatment. So remarkable sort of clinical manifestation of the principles I showed you in the molecular study earlier on, demonstrating an increase in insulin sensitivity and improvement in diabetic. And here you have overall survival in this patient group. So you can see that the patients that got given testosterone in the blue line versus those that did not get given testosterone, you can see the mortality difference is very significant. And with it, you can have an analysis of the causes of death, and you can see myocardial infarction, stroke, and the combination being significantly less in the testosterone arm, the microvascular complications of diabetes being significantly less in the testosterone arm, and of course, with it, of course, the issue of falls and so on, again, significantly less in the testosterone arm because of muscle rehabilitation. And here is another study published last year where they showed that there was a significant reduction in the progression of pre-diabetic patients into diabetes. 90% of these patients had a resolution of pre-diabetes versus 1% in the control arm. And similarly, progression to diabetes was in 0% of those patients treated with testosterone, whereas it was 40% in the control arm. So clearly, insulin is a remarkable insulin sensitizing effect. Testosterone is a remarkable insulin sensitizing. Now, one final study, which we are in the middle of right now, and it should be soon published, where we looked at the effect of bariatric surgery on adolescents undergoing bariatric surgery for morbid obesity. And in this one, you can see that the average testosterone was significantly below the 300, mean was 194, and these subjects were followed up for 5 years. You can see that the weight fell, and of course the maximum weight fall was around 2 years, and then testosterone concentrations arose in parallel with the fall in body weight. SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, also increases because it's a marker for insulin resistance, and in insulin resistance states it's low, so following bariatric surgery it rises. And free testosterone has a parallel increase, and you can see that peak again at 24. There is a direct correlation between weight loss and insulin and the testosterone concentrations. So clearly, body weight is a major determinant even in this group of testosterone concentrations. Last but not the least, this is a very significant slide I'm showing you where in this bariatric study, those patients who continued to lose weight and maintain their weight loss, the testosterone concentrations in the gray line at the top were maintained. But those patients who regained weight in the orange line, you can see these are the guys in the blue line with a fall in testosterone concentrations. So, conclusion from this particular study is that weight loss is a major determinant. Weight is a major determinant of testosterone concentrations. Obesity will lead to low testosterone concentrations, and reversal of obesity will lead to an increase in testosterone concentrations. So I'd like to conclude by saying that hypogonadotropic hypogonadism is the major mechanism of hypogonadal state in type 2 diabetes and obesity. That type 2 diabetes and obesity are the major causes of male hypogonadal state. That testosterone administration will not only restore insulin sensitivity and therefore may potentially over a long period of time may even reverse diabetes. It is also something that maintains muscle, reduces adiposity, maintains hematocrit, and also maintains sensitivity to testosterone itself. So with this, I'd like to close my talk and I'd welcome any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Dandona, sir. And it is indeed pleasure that you are available here in your early morning. From early morning, we see your active participation, and thank you for blessing us. As this is a digital conference, we would like to, as a SwasthyaCON team, we would like to generate the digital ceremony of Swasthya Gold Medal oration, and then we would have your few words, please, sir. Sir, your introduction, please.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, Dandona sir.
Hi. So are there any questions?
If you can share few words, and that is always mentoring for ourselves, then please, you are audible and go ahead. Dr. Dandona?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little louder? I don't hear you very clearly.
We would like to get your mentoring words from yourself post
Oh,
oration. It is indeed pleasure, and it is always pleasure to listen to you, sir.
thank you. So basically, I mean, of course, I'm extremely grateful for this opportunity and the honor that you've given me. But I just want to underline the fact that diabetes and obesity, as I mentioned in my talk, are the two most important causes of the male hypogonadal state. It's an endocrine syndrome within an endocrine disease. And people find it difficult to conceptualize, but it's true. And the two are intertwined in a way that, as I showed you, not only does testosterone therapy reverse the insulin resistance that exists in obesity, that it can even reverse diabetes itself. So, something to keep in mind. And we've got several studies now extending this concept. And we are now looking at the state of chronic renal failure. And in the state of chronic renal failure, we've described, and I wish I had included those slides in my talk, that at the end stage renal failure, 80% of patients are hypogonadal. So when you have a dialysis patient with diabetes, it's more or less certain that he'll be hypogonadal as well. And we know that muscle loss and anemia are two very, very important um, elements of chronic renal failure, and especially in patients with dialysis. And as you know, we are giving people erythropoietin for anemia. And in a very recent paper, we've just shown that when you give testosterone to such patients, you can get rid of erythropoietin or remarkably reduce the doses. And erythropoietin itself is not a very safe compound. It leads to pro-inflammatory changes and increase in cardiovascular events. So, and of course, it's extremely, exorbitantly expensive. So if we can replace, at least in the male, the use of erythropoietin with testosterone, that's going to be a great advance and great contribution. But the other side of the coin in chronic renal failure is the loss of skeletal muscle. And when you lose skeletal muscle, as I showed you, testosterone is a great help because it restores the skeletal muscle. And as you saw, within 6 months in these hypogonadal diabetics, it increased skeletal muscle mass by nearly 3 kilos. And if we can restore that element in the chronic renal failure patients, of course, again, it'll add to their quality of life. And now there are lots of papers showing that longevity is dependent upon your skeletal muscle mass. The shorter that you are in terms of skeletal muscle mass, the more limited you are, the less likely are you to live long, and you're vulnerable to cardiovascular disease. So all of these issues have arisen out of our initial demonstration in 2004 that one third of type 2 diabetics are hypogonadal. And that too is a funny story as to how it was discovered. When in 1997, Viagra, sildenafil first arrived, and urologists began to prescribe it, as if there was no tomorrow. And they found a whole lot of patients who were non-responders. And these non-responders were largely diabetics because in the diabetics, Pfizer trials had shown that the response is not as good as that in non-diabetics. And so these patients got referred to me. And when I systematically investigated them for their erectile dysfunction, I found patient after patient after patient being hypogonadal. And that's how this syndrome was discovered. So it's thanks to Viagra that we discovered the syndrome. But as you know now, it is the major cause of male hypogonadal state. And our work has added 19 million new hypogonadals to the US population. And the figures are similar globally. There are some studies from India which have confirmed that, studies from Australia, studies from China, studies from Japan, Europe, Italy, United Kingdom. So it really is now an established issue. And every patient with diabetes and or obesity, or the combination of the two, should have their testosterone measured so that they can get appropriate treatment.
Thank you, sir. And it is indeed pleasure to get the oration from you.
Thank you.
And thank you, sir. Yes, Kavya.
Thank you so much, sir, for your kind words.